Onimusha Warlords is the type of game that you're able to play over and over again without getting tired. My first exposure to this game was way back on the PlayStation 2. It was one of those games that you really didn't get to fully take in as a kid. Of course, you could appreciate how frickin' awesome everything looked, and running around as some dude with a katana was also pretty cool, but it was always hard to grasp anything actually going on with the story or the things happening in the game because all you wanted to do was smack around enemies. But honestly, Onimusha is fantastic and deserves to be covered as best as humanly possible. So with that, we're gonna dig out a little history and learn more about the game. Onimusha initially released on the PlayStation 2 on the 25th of January in the year 2001. The idea of the game was first conceived in 1997 as a Resident Evil spin-off set in the Sengoku period. Interestingly enough, it would have been set in a house filled with traps, something similar to the mansion in the original RE. But instead of using guns to fight off zombies, the player had more of a melee focus using swords on the game's enemies. This version would ultimately be scrapped and the project would be moved from the PlayStation 1 to the PlayStation 2. However, you can still find footage of the original online. Onimusha Warlords would release on the PS2 with positive scores, having a solid 86 Metacritic. Obviously, the game was compared to Resident Evil with similarities like the pre-rendered backgrounds, fixed camera angles, and exploration aspects, but it would also be praised due to the gameplay having more of an emphasis on action. However, Onimusha wouldn't be looked at as highly as it could have been due to things like the game's short length and the tank controls, something that would be rectified years down the line in the later entries of the series. Even with criticism, however, Onimusha Warlords would receive platinum status on the PS2 and be the first game on the system to sell 1 million copies, with sales totaling out at a little over 2 million copies. Additionally, the game would also be updated and ported to the Xbox in 2002 under the name Genma Onimusha, with surprisingly a lot of interesting updates. The game had a significant number of changes too. This included the addition of a hard mode, some new enemies and areas, a more condensed way to upgrade weapons, as well as the inclusion of additional armor. In the Xbox version, the player could also absorb green souls that would give them invincibility and restore health after collecting 5 of them. Additionally, enemies could also take these orbs before Samanosuke, which would make them stronger. Outside of that, there was also a new area called the Ogre Tower. This new content was a more difficult version of the Dark Realm, which was a 20-floor side dungeon contained within both Onimusha Warlords and Genma Onimusha games. But that's about it for Genma Onimusha, since the version that we're going to be looking at is the Onimusha Warlords Remastered. This version would release for the PlayStation 4, the Xbox One, the Nintendo Switch, and PC in Japan on December 20th, 2018, and then on January 15th, 2019 for the rest of the world. It mostly remains the same as the original PlayStation 2 version, however, it did at least receive widescreen high-definition updates, as well as the option to use updated controls, and now has achievements and whatnot. Sadly, this version wouldn't receive any of the Genma updates, so it's pretty much just the upscaled HD port of the original with better controls. This is something that would actually be criticized by reviewers, as many aspects of the game are now dated. All things considered, Onimusha Warlords Remaster is regarded as being a relatively bare-bones port. We'll come back to some of these things later, but for now, let's move on to the story and the events of Onimusha. As I try to do with my other videos, I like to warn people about spoilers if they're at least remotely interested in playing these games at some point. That being said, this next section will contain spoilers, so if you don't want anything in the game ruined for you, feel free to skip to the provided timestamp. Here we go. Onimusha Warlords is set in the Sengoku period of Japan. It begins with a cutscene showing the Battle of Okahazama. In this introduction, we're introduced to our main protagonist, Samanosuke, who is attacked by Imagawa Yoshimoto's soldiers while watching the battle go on. He messes these dudes up, making it look easy by smacking them around. We then hear that Nobunaga's soldiers have taken Lord Tsurugu's head when Nobunaga gets up laughing before an arrow right in the throat. Nobunaga then falls to the ground dead. Tragic stuff. We then see a shot of Samanosuke riding a horse with haste, rushing to find Princess Yuki, who we learn had been kidnapped. With Kaede, his ninja companion, by his side, He pledges to save the princess. After this, we see a shot of Lord Nobunaga, who isn't actually dead at all. And then the title screen happens, and we are now officially Onimusha'd up enough to take on the game. But not before this sequence happens with the reading of a letter that Princess Yuki had sent. In the letter, she says that people had been disappearing from Inabayama Castle and that she thinks that it's the work of monsters. She finishes the letter by telling Samanosuke to come and save her. Shortly after this, Samanosuke is attacked by Three Eyes, one of which actually has Princess Yuki. Samanosuke fights the demons, inevitably causing them to retreat, thus allowing him to save the princess. We did it, friends. We saved the princess. Game over. Roll the credits. Nope. Boom, boom, boom comes in this big red dude named Osric, who has my favorite voice acting line delivery in any video game ever.
Flee while you can, you worthless bug.
Samanosuke attacks Osric, doing absolutely nothing before he's smacked into a wall. Osric then kidnaps Princess Yuki and Samanosuke collapses. He then comes to, finding himself surrounded by these purple dudes who say that they are a clan of ogres who had been subverted by the demons and that Samanosuke isn't strong enough to actually take on the demons. They then give him the Oni Gauntlet so that he could destroy the demons. Samanosuke then wakes up with the Oni Gauntlet, proclaims that he's going to destroy the demons and save the princess, then he rushes off. He eventually runs into some dude who locks him into a room with demons. He kills them all, and then the dudes open the door for him. Samanosuke confronts the guy who locked him in, who then tells him that the demons attack them, and then they tell Samanosuke that they may have also attacked the keep, and then direct him to a shortcut that leads there. Along the way, Samanosuke obtains a Shiden orb, which allows him to use the Ryzen, a very cool looking katana. He then heads into the keep, fighting demons along the way. The next major scene that happens is my absolute favorite in the game due to the phenomenal voice acting, so I'll just play it in its entirety for you to enjoy.
Huh? Didn't know humans could be such pests?
Where is the princess?
Humans are more tasty when angry, and I haven't eaten in a while.
So Samanosuke kills Osric, and then not long after, he runs into yet another demon. This dude's name is Guildenstern. This dude also has his own fantastic line delivery, so just listen.
Sweet, beautiful, lovely, the dripping blood, and what's this? Oh, a liver.
Anyways, Guildenstern mentions that he resurrected Nobunaga after he was killed in the Battle of Okehazama. He then goes on to say that Nobunaga made a pact with the demons, pledging his eternal loyalty to them. Guildenstern then unleashes this pink demon named Reynaldo to attack Samanosuke as he escapes. Samanosuke kills the demon and then grabs the Koen orb, which gives him this big old greatsword called the En-Ryu. After this, Samanosuke heads into the keep, where he runs into a kid being grabbed by a weird-looking dude named Tokashiro Kinoshita, who is a part of the Oda clan. Tokashiro asks Samanosuke to join the Oda clan, who quickly declines, which leaves Tokashiro to say that he won't give up in recruiting him before he leaves the room laughing. Not too long after this, Samanosuke runs into the kid again, who's being chased by Kaede. Samanosuke finds out the kid's name is Yumimaru and then asks him why and how he was at the keep. The kid then runs away from them, with Samanosuke telling Kaede to look for him while he continues searching for the princess. Samanosuke once again runs into Kaede, who tells him that she was able to uncover Yumimaru's identity. She tells him that Yumimaru's parents were killed at war, and that Princess Yuki had found him and brought him to the castle to raise him as her brother. Samanosuke concludes that Yumimaru had also come to the castle to save the princess. However, at this time, he's still uncertain as to why Tokashiro is after the kid. After this, Samanosuke and Kaede become trapped, which results in them having to do a series of puzzles to escape. They eventually come to a room where Samanosuke is trapped. This leads Kaede to have to solve some stupid puzzle to free him before the room that Samanosuke is in is filled up with water. After Samanosuke is saved, he and Kaede eventually split up as he goes on to continue to search for Yumimaro while she searches for clues. He does eventually come across the kid again, who's being taken away by Three Eyes, but before Samanosuke can save Yumimaro, he's interrupted by Tokushiro again, who once again asks him if he's ready to serve the Oda clan. After a conversation between these two, Tokushiro tells Samanosuke that a dark ceremony is going to take place soon, and that Lord Nobunaga will drink Princess Yusuke's blood from her skull to ensure the Oda clan's victory over the Saito clan. This prompts Samanosuke to take a swipe at Tokushiro as he escapes. Continuing on from here, Samanosuke runs into the demon Marcellus. After they fight, with Marcellus falling off the top of the castle, Marcellus drops the Arashi Orb, which also gives Samanosuke a dual-bladed weapon called the Ship Pool. Not long after this, Samanosuke rescues Yumimaro, who asks him to go and save the princess. Samanosuke goes on to give the motive as to why Yuki took care of the boy. He then goes on to tell Yumimaro about the ways of the world, and that he needs to go and see them for himself and share them. They're then interrupted by a woman named Nui, who tells them that she served Princess Hatsu and that Yuki is underground. This scene prompts Samanosuke to go underground to rescue the princess, but instead of finding the princess, he finds Tokushiro, who once again asks Samanosuke to join the Oda clan. Samanosuke again refuses, which prompts Tokushiro to tell the demons to prepare for the dark ceremony. This results in Samanosuke being zapped with a lightning bolt and then trapped. Tokushiro then tells Samanosuke that Kaede is in trouble by now, before we go on to see that she is in fact in trouble. In this scene, Nui grabs Yumimaro, and then we see the doppelganger Samanosuke, who punches Kaede in the gut, knocking her to the ground. This scene is followed by another involving a laughing Tokushiro and Samanosuke. Samanosuke is then absorbed into the ground as Tokushiro leaves the room. We then get a cut back to Kaede, who comes to and then goes off, where she learns from a dying soldier that the West Prison was attacked. She then goes off to the prison, where she finds Princess Yuki. While Kaede attempts to free the princess by picking the lock of the jail cell, Yuki's taken away by Guildenstern, leaving behind Kaede to fight a demon. Kaede fights and kills this demon, and then proclaims that she needs to go and find Samanosuke. We then see a cut to a knocked out Samanosuke, who wakes up in an underground area. Not long after this, Samanosuke is attacked by his doppelganger. He makes short work of this dude and then escapes back into the castle, where he finds the Nui with an unconscious Yumimaro. Nui then transforms into a big old bug-looking demon as a gate to the demon world pops out of nowhere and destroys half of the castle. The demon, known as Hakuba in the game, escapes off into the demon world with Yumimaro. As the door closes, it's sealed with a barrier upon it in the form of some eye thing. Kaede enters the room shortly after, tossing a kunai at the eye, which does absolutely nothing. The two then separate to search for a way to destroy the barrier. This search eventually leads Samanosuke to a new area, where he finds a boat that leads to a building holding the great bow. He grabs the bow and then is trapped inside as a gate blocks the door. This prompts enemies known as sharks to pop out of the water and surround Samanosuke. We then see a cut to Kaede looking at the building where Samanosuke is now trapped. As she looks at the water, she too is attacked by sharks. After this, she is able to obtain the great arrow and then heads to rescue Samanosuke. We're then back to seeing what Samanosuke is up to as Hakuba smashes into the building. She then tells Samanosuke that Yumimaro will be sacrificed in front of Princess Yuki so that her sorrow will peak to make her blood its strongest for the dark ceremony, which will give Nobunaga even more power. Samanosuke then bodies everything in the room and then escapes using a ladder after finding out Kaede had ignited some gunpowder. This causes the building to explode, finishing off everything inside of the building. Both Samanosuke and Kaede now appear washed up on shore. Kaede passes out and Samanosuke carries her to the keep, where he proclaims the nightmare must end as he rushes off to the demon world gate. Using the great bow and the arrows, Samanosuke destroys the barrier and then enters the demon world, where he comes across Guildenstern. Guildenstern and Samanosuke have a brief conversation, which results in Guildenstern getting mad at Samanosuke for mocking him. This results in Guildenstern calling a now stronger version of Marcellus to battle. Samanosuke once again bodies the demon and then rushes further into the demon world, where he finds Princess Yuki and Yumimaro bound to a wall. Before he could go and rescue them, Fortinbras busts into the room and calls upon Nobunaga to come and drink Princess Yuki's blood. This leads Fortinbras to then randomly give Yuki a little shock. I don't know why. After which Samanosuke fights Fortinbras. He eventually defeats the demon, and then him and Kaede rescue both Yuki and Yumimaro. As they make their escape, however, Fortinbras grabs Samanosuke and crushes him in his hand. This causes Samanosuke to spit up blood that splurts into the gauntlet, causing Samanosuke to transform then also blow off Fortinbras's hand in the process. Samanosuke, now in Onimusha, plunges his katana so hard into Fortinbras's head that his eyes pop out, thus killing the demon. We then see a shirtless Samanosuke pop up to the side of Nobunaga as the demon world crumbles. The screen then fades to black and we're left wondering what happened between the two. After this, it's really just kind of like an epilogue. The narrator here tells us that the Saito family's history was ended by Nobunaga, who had taken into Bayama Castle, but wasn't exactly sure if demons were involved at all. We then find out that Yuki had gone to stay with the Baron of the Sakai province after the fall of the Saito family, but would then leave with Yumimaru to see the world. We then find out Kaede had been searching for Samanosuke, who had been missing after the defeat of Fortinbras, but was never able to find him. She then would go on to become an agent of Mitsuhide Akechi for some years before she would pass in a war. And then we officially find out that no one actually knows what happened to Samanosuke, or maybe not, as we see the credit shot of Samanosuke staring down Inabayama Castle before walking off, thus ending our journey with Onimusha Warlords. Summing up all of my feelings about the story of Onimusha Warlords, there are no perfect words that can describe this incredible ride of randomness. What begins as what I would say is a build-up to what feels like a pretty serious story, it devolves into this campy trip of some of the weirdest stuff in existence. It actually feels intentional too. Like, take, for example, Guildenstern. I had no idea what this dude's deal was or even what his name was until doing light research on the game and reading more into it. The whole time playing the game, I had been referring to him as that one dude. It wasn't until I went back through the credits where I even saw the name Guildenstern too. Like, how was I supposed to know that was his name when it's never mentioned and no one in the game ever refers to him as such, not even the notes? That dude is something else too. Even after going through the game multiple times and reading all the lore books that he apparently had left behind, I was left wondering, like, what is with this guy? Why is there no closure on him? Where did he go in the end? Like, what? I don't even know. As far as what I've looked into, it's not even answered in this game, as everything is kind of wrapped up in the game's sequels. But that isn't the only weird thing about the game. You also have parts like this one with some random narration that happens in the middle of the game for no reason whatsoever.
I am a servant of the Oda clan. My name is Tokichiro Kinoshita.
This man will eventually conquer the world under the name Hideyoshi Toyotomi.
Honestly, this is the only point outside of the ending where it actually happens too. It made me think that there was supposed to be more narration, but then someone forgot and just kind of decided not to bother with it. It's just strange. And I mean, with all these weird moments happening, it always kind of felt like there was something that I missed, and I don't quite know how to wrap my head around it. Why? I don't know, but I love it. But that's just Onimusha Warlords. It's a game that has moments that feel like a random series of events that happen with no context whatsoever. But that's really all I had to say about the story. So before I continue, let's discuss Oni Spirits. Oh boy. Oni Spirits is a minigame that unlocks after you obtain all the fluorite collectibles and then finish the main game once. It's best described as a burning heap of garbage, and I absolutely hated every second of it. It's honestly the worst part of the game, and just thinking about it makes me absolutely sick. You go through a series of levels breaking pots before the demons do. If you don't, you just die and you have to restart. Each level has a certain number of pots and enemies throughout. There's sometimes chests as well, which contain things like herbs, ammo, or weapons and armor. There's some levels that are insanely frustrating and require a bit of tactics to successfully do. But when you are able to actually finish Oni Spirits, you then unlock Ultimate Mode. As for what Ultimate Mode is, it's basically an even easier easy mode, New Game Plus. Everything in the game is essentially the same as it was before, nothing different. It's just having the Bishaman sword at the start of the game makes it easier to speed run through. Other than that, you get infinite magic for every weapon, you start with free soul tickets, and infinite ammo for the bow and the matchlock gun. I honestly beat the game 3 times to compile enough footage for this video using Ultimate Mode, and each playthrough was under 2 hours compared to the 5 that I spent in normal mode. Speaking of which, let's get into a little more detail about how the game itself plays. If it's not really that clear by now, Onimusha Warlords is a third-person action-adventure game. It's essentially similar to the classic Resident Evil games in the way that you go around exploring, finding keys to open doors, and solving puzzles, as well as collecting notes to help learn the game's lore. There's also this little side dungeon in the game that I briefly mentioned earlier called the Dark Realm. In this area, you're just fighting enemies throughout the game and collecting items such as the Bishaman Ocarina that can be used to obtain the best weapon in the game. Additionally, there's also doors that can only be opened by upgrading the weapon magic orbs that you find throughout the story. You can do this by going around and killing demons and collecting their orbs using the Oni Gauntlet. These orbs consist of 3 different colors. You get your red orbs, which can be used to upgrade your weapons and the respective magic orbs. The yellow orbs restore health, and the blue orbs restore your magic. You smack around enemies with your swords or by hitting them with your ranged weapons. In the game, there's 5 different swords for Samanosuke and 2 different ranged weapons available, each with 2 different ammo types. You start the game with the normal sword, which is just a basic katana, but then you get the Shiden orb, which allows you to use the Ryzen katana, which allows you to use a lightning magic attack. Then there's a Koen, which gives the Enryu. This is a big old great sword that allows a fire wave magic attack. Then there's my personal favorite, the Arashi orb, which gives the double-bladed sword called the Shippu. The magic attack for this weapon is a gigantic wind tornado attack, which I think looks pretty freaking cool. Each of these weapons takes on a different appearance when you level them as well. Personally, I love the way the Shippu looks fully upgraded. It's pretty awesome. But beyond that, there's the Bishaman sword, which I mentioned you start off with in ultimate mode. It's also worth noting that with the Bishaman sword, you can essentially skip grinding out on all of the Oni magic orbs and just use the weapon itself to open all the locked orb doors. This weapon is highly overpowered and basically shreds enemies, even with the normal attack. The weapon special also differs from the 3 weapon orb magics by having its own special that's really just a really strong slash. It's super powerful, but in modes like Ultimate, where you have infinite magic, I found that Shippu's magic attack was a far better choice for spamming away with. Beyond the melee weapons, you have the bow and the matchlock gun. Not a lot to say here. The bow's a bow and the matchlock is a gun. You get normal and fire arrows with the bow, and with the matchlock, you get normal bullets and burst bullets. Fire arrows and burst bullets can be obtained by upgrading normal ammunition with souls. They aren't really worth upgrading at all. I never really found a use for them outside of maybe a few fights. That being said, it's an option if you get bored. You also have Kaede, who has her own unique melee weapons and a ranged kunai throwing attack. As for her weapons, she has the starter knife and the sacred knife, which isn't really any different in terms of attacks, but it is stronger. I do have to mention that it's kind of a shame that we don't get to play as Kaede more throughout Onimusha Warlords. Her playstyle is kind of fun, but her sections in the game don't really feel worth sitting around killing monsters, as she doesn't have the ability to absorb souls in the same way as Samanosuke. Therefore, you just end up wasting more healing items playing as her, which kind of sucks. It makes you want to get through areas even quicker by running past and avoiding enemies instead of actually fighting them. Speaking of enemies, Onimusha has more than a handful of them. You get your weakest enemies, the soldier demons. Sometimes they get bows, sometimes they get katanas. Other enemies include the Bazoo, which is an enemy that does an annoying roll attack. Similar to the soldier demons, they're pretty weak, just kind of annoying. Then there's the Three Eyes in the upgraded form, the Dark Spiders, which are both kind of like ninja looking dudes. Both of these are annoying since they're fast and like dodge and whatnot. There's also a Guildenstern called Ronaldo, which is this pink looking dude who likes to hit you with these tentacles underground. These ain't too bad either. It's just annoying having to find out where they are when you zone into an area and you're immediately attacked by the ground tentacles. There's also the Girion, which is the skull looking things that like to fly around and absorb souls that are in the air. You also get the Volshaman, which are these big looking dudes that could go invisible. They're annoying, but if you keep a lookout for them, they're not too bad. They just have a lot of health. There's also the Barabazoo, which is a gigantic ox looking dude. There's also an even bigger red version of it called the Bagawasha. Then there's also the Owasha, which is along the same lines, big strong ox horn demon with an axe. They're honestly probably the strongest normal enemies in the game and require the most effort outside of bosses. Then there's these things, which are for some reason called sharks. I don't know why. They're pretty easy though. You don't really see them until the later parts of the game though. Same goes for the dark armor demon. These dudes roll around with a shield and are pretty strong, but not as strong as their red colored variants, the long arm demon. These dudes got big old katanas and like to grab you and annoyingly choke you out. But that's really it for the enemies. Onimusha Warlords' atmosphere isn't necessarily as creepy as something like Resident Evil either, but it does have its own moments with the game's nicely designed pre-rendered backgrounds. I think the most unsettling area was the keep underground, where everything was dimly lit and made you feel a little claustrophobic with some of the narrow hallways. Other than that, you're mostly either inside of the keep, which isn't really spooky or anything, or outside where it's more lush with trees and surrounding waters. Well, I don't think the game itself is all that creepy. I do feel that the music in the game does give off a very eerie tone that is capable of getting under the skin a little bit. It's a great soundtrack, and honestly, it does a good job of evoking feelings of playing something like Resident Evil for sure as well. It's just kind of a shame that the demons aren't nearly as creepy as something like the zombies in Resident Evil. What I will say though is that there is something great about the sounds of the weapons in the game too. The ting you hear deflecting attacks or the critical slashing sound attack on enemies does feel satisfying. The magic weapon attacks also sound pretty cool too, especially the Shiden and the Arashi orbs, which both sounded like you were unleashing mayhem when successfully used. And even outside of these weapons, the matchlocks sounded pretty cool too, though I didn't really find myself using it all that too often since the game was easier to play just hacking away at enemies. Then there's the game's voice acting. You didn't think I'd forget about this, did ya? It's phenomenal in the way that it's so bad that it becomes amazing again. I don't think I've ever heard line delivery as superb as Onimusha Warlords, in the sense that it really makes me feel like they were trying to go for MAME level voices. My favorites were Guildenstern and that big red demon dude Osric. They're so cheesy, and I honestly found myself repeating lines every so often because they got stuck in my head. From the outside looking in, the voice acting might sound terrible, but from my standpoint, I find it memorable.
I have no time for you.
What did you say? How dare you? A mere human mock me?
So this next part is a late addition to the script, since I really don't have any major issues with Onimusha Warlords, and any of the ones that I do have are extremely nitpicky. But I'll just come out and say it. The puzzle boxes can be a bit annoying at times, especially the ones where you have to enter in codes using symbols to answer questions. You can find the answers using books that you obtain throughout the game, but honestly, even when I attempted to solve these things myself, I couldn't figure it out, which led to me just looking up the answers online. I'm not really a fan of having to go out and start Googling on how to solve puzzles, but these ones eventually got to me. Other than that, I'd say that the section of the game where Samanosuke and Kaede become trapped and have to solve puzzles is a bit annoying too. If you go into this one blind, it can be particularly frustrating, and if you forget or don't even bother to save before entering this area, there's a possibility that you could potentially end up losing more progress than you might be comfortable losing if you make any errors. This is really topped off with the Kaede puzzle at the end of the area, since it really comes out of left field. And if you don't solve the puzzle within the allotted time, it's another game over. But like I said, all of this is nitpicking, and I honestly don't even really think that any of this is that big of a deal personally. And that's honestly most of what there is to say about Onimusha Warlords Remastered from my end. If you're looking for a Resident Evil type game with more of an emphasis on melee action combat, then Onimusha Warlords is still a fantastic game to play. The updated control scheme makes it more fluid versus the tank controls, though I don't think that it really hinders anything too much if someone was curious enough to play using them. Either way, it's a really fun game to play around with, even if it's doing something as simple as trying to speed run through as quickly as possible. And then there's things like the story itself. It's weird. Like, really weird. It's one of the weirdest games that I think I've ever played, but at the same time, it's like a fantastic B-movie kind of game. There's so much about the game that makes zero sense unless you feel like digging deeper into the game. At first glance, everything comes off as campy because of it, but that just makes it better. It's a satisfying game with fun combat and an interesting world to explore with lots of fascinating characters that stay with you even with how short the game is. All things considered, I'd honestly go as far as to say that Onimusha Warlords is probably one of my favorite games, and I don't think I could ever get tired of it, even after replaying the game more than a handful of times for this video. And even now, I still don't think I'm tired of it. I want to go and collect things like the alternate costumes and grab extra achievements and see everything that I could possibly see within the game, and that's something I honestly don't feel too often with games anymore. It's a shame we've not seen any news about remasters of Onimusha 2 or 3, or even Dawn of Dreams. I would love for the opportunity to go and try these games. They're on a list of stuff that I've never gotten around to in my life, and I would absolutely love to be able to scratch them off my checks box and at least try them all. But for now, what most of us have available is Onimusha Warlords, and I'd say that's alright for the time being, but but man, would it be awesome to be able to experience the rest of the series. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate it so much. I'm sorry if I mispronounced anything in the game. There's a lot of words that were a bit confusing to say without actually hearing them. Anyway, if you like this video, please give a like, maybe subscribe too. As always, it helps me out. I'm also on Twitch, Kick, and do YouTube streams throughout the week, so if you want to subscribe on any of those as well, I'll provide links in the description. Thank you again for your support, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.